I'm here to establish kind of the theme, benefits of and balance related to scale, talk about scale a little bit in a conceptual level. And so my purpose is to introduce that topic kind of broadly. This morning I walked past a Gap near my apartment. They got a new big set of window displays and these giant photos of these hipster looking people. And the legend on the window is, "The coolest designers in the world." And internally I sort of snorted with my typical elitism and thought, yeah, right, you know, the Gap, the coolest designers in the world. And then I thought about it a little bit. There were no names on there. I don't know who they were. To my knowledge, the coolest designers in the world are down on East 9th Street near Tompkins Square Park. There's like a road there between about 3rd Avenue and Avenue A where there's these little boutiques and they're making their stuff in the back, and they have collectives who take turns working in the store and putting that's the coolest designers in the world. And then I thought, well, there aren't any names up there. That might be them, right? That could be the coolest designers in the world. I don't know. And then I thought, you know, if the Gap wanted to, it could definitely hire the coolest designers in the world. The Gap's rounding error on their design budget in a year could make all of 9th Street multimillionaires, and Gap wouldn't even notice. Maybe that is the coolest designers in the world, notwithstanding the oxymoronic proclamation thereof. So that's what scale is, or that's an example of scale, right? The Gap can hire the coolest designers in the world and put them in their window all they want, and that's scale, because they have such a massive operating scale that they do things that normal human beings can't do. So what is scale about? First, I'm going to talk about definitions. I hear the term used a lot in many conversations I have, and I don't know that everybody agrees on the definition, so I'm going to start with kind of a formal definition, at least the definition of the kind of scale that I'm talking about and that's relevant to this discussion. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about it in our industry, talk about it in our company, and then talk about product development and how product development is a challenge to scale, and how does an organization do product development, which wouldn't seem to be a scaled activity. How can you make it a scaled activity, or how can you fit that in with the objectives of scale? So the first thing is, what is scale? So there's a classic kind of economic definition of scale, and that is that whenever the marginal cost of production goes down, you're gaining scale. And I would, for our purposes, particularly in the digital world, include distribution in this as well. It says production, but I think it also means distribution. So it costs you less to make the next copy. I mean, classic printing is a very scalable activity, right? There's the make ready, and there's the blah, 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 and then the copies don't cost anything, they cost very little. That's an example of scale. And there's many, many different examples of scale, but that's the fundamental idea of what scale is. It's also distinct from another concept, which is economies of scope. This is a little bit different. This is where you take existing resources, existing capabilities, existing plant, existing people, and move into adjacencies, and you have an advantage, a cost advantage in that environment. In both cases, we're talking about cost advantages being created by the size and repetition of the activities in an organization. So that's the kind of scale that I want to talk about. And for this discussion, I also want to clarify what scale is not. And these are some of the confusions that I sometimes hear when we're talking about. The hiring more people isn't scale. You can be bigger, more expansive, but that's not scale in the terms of what economic scale means. Taking on more business is not necessarily in and of itself scale. In fact, if you have 5 people working and you double your business and you have 10 people working, you haven't scaled at all. At least not in your human resource cost. In the internet world, handling more traffic isn't scale. Handling more traffic with the same servers is scale, but just handling more traffic isn't scale, right? So the whole point is using a set of resources you have and getting more productivity out of those. And a larger office space isn't scale either, just so you know. It's not scale in the definition of classic economic terms. Here's what scale is related to those same themes. Scale is producing more with the same number of people, That's scaling, right? So I add another journal title, I publish another book, I do whatever, I don't really change my cost structure, I'm getting scale. Adding new customers at a lower cost of sales or delivery or cost of product or cost of production, that's scale. Handling more traffic with no or little additional marginal expense, that's scale. So that's distinct from just handling more traffic, right? And the same office space serving more revenue, that's scale. I don't recommend you do this, but that's kind of how that goes. So scale in our industry or in industry in general, what are the factors of scale? Well, there's some obvious ones, right? So sales and marketing. I publish a front list of 500 titles. I go up 10%, the same sales force sells it, I go to the same meetings, I print the same materials, I have the same website, blah, 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 blah. I'm getting scale in my marketing and my sales. So the ability to put more product through the same sales and marketing channel and expense structure is scale. Production expenses. The more you do, the less each unit costs. This is basic stuff, but it's important to understand when we start thinking about how this is impacting our industry. So we achieve scale by getting bigger. Once you get bigger, I mean, what's happened in our world is once you get big enough, you start offshoring, so you have a labor arbitrage. You can't really do that when you're small because the cost of setting it up and the cost of managing it and the cost of organizing it outweighs the labor arbitrage in and of itself. And once you get too big enough and you can do it, then you can drive a lot of cost out by doing that. So that's scale. Technology development and maintenance. So everybody in this room, theoretically at least, could build their own digital products, could go get hosted on their own, do that. But obviously, the cost of doing that on the basis of your list of products or your revenue base is challenging. And so you have platform companies like ours and shared technology expenses across a group of like producers in order to reduce those costs and achieve scale. And then product development, and I mentioned that earlier, product development doesn't seem like a very scalable activity, but I'm going to make some arguments that product development is actually scalable in some different ways. And I think that's an important dimension of understanding how to scale what doesn't seem like a scalable business. There's some other factors of scale that people don't think about as readily, but they're very important. So one is increasingly, and maybe this is not opaque any longer, maybe this is obvious. You know, increasingly we're becoming a data-oriented industry, and the data outputs have their own value and they're being monetized. Elsevier is now a data analytics company, not a publishing company. Like literally, that's the line now. So scale is very, very helpful to building economic value around data. If you just have the data of, if you have one journal and you have the users of that journal and you have the data around the usage of that journal and you can TDM the journal, you know, there's maybe some value there, but not anywhere near as much as if you have 5,000 journals and all the usage of that and all the content of that to TDM. So data aggregation and the ability to monetize that is another benefit of scale that we have to contend with. Leadership and leadership vision. So in general, bigger companies have the time, ability, staffing, hierarchy, structure, and attract the kinds of leadership talent that have a broader, longer vision. So you probably didn't realize this, but I'm not Mark Zuckerberg, right? Don't have any hoodies either. I'm not Mark Zuckerberg. I'm running a technology company to the best of my ability. I can't get hired to be the CEO of Facebook. So there's a difference in sort of leadership, scale, and vision. Zuckerberg's probably a little bit smarter than me, but he's also availed himself of a massive infrastructure that supports the kind of directional innovation. And likewise, a small shop with 4 developers in Charlottesville, Virginia, who's doing project work doesn't have our scale of leadership. So that's just an inherent factor we have to all kind of be aware of that tends to be, in pattern, a difference to scale. And likewise, management and staff capabilities. We all sort of realize, like, the bigger the organization, axiomatically, the more capabilities they can acquire, it can attract in terms of human resources, and also develop in terms of investing in the kinds of staff, the kind of technology, kind of skill sets that can be more expansive in terms of product development. So that's a scale factor as well. Audience leverage. So if you're a very focused organization, let's say you're in a vertical domain, you have a certain kind of audience, or again, back to you've got a journal and you've got an audience for that journal, you don't necessarily have the opportunity to avail yourself of additional engagement and revenue opportunities with that audience because you don't have any other products to direct them to. So cross-selling, upselling, engagement opportunities are limited. If you're a large organization, either vertically or horizontally, with lots of audience, then you have the opportunity to move audiences around. You can move an audience from your journals, to your books, to your consumer information, to your meeting information, to your membership information, to your, I'm talking about societies, or to cross-cut all of your knowledge assets and present those to audiences and engage them further. And whatever way that engagement is monetized, whether that's additional revenues on the actual content itself, advertising, or related, membership attendance, et cetera. Audience leverage is another big sort of factor of scale. And then cost of capital. This is not an economics lesson. This is sort of an economics lesson. Thing is, sorry, I'm supposed to set the stage for the day. I got the boring job to make sure everybody knows what scale is. But here's the thing. Everybody's capital costs different amounts of money, right? So big giant public companies with reasonable share prices and access to commercial debt markets have a very low cost of capital. So if I'm investing $1 million in trying to do a new product, right? And I'm gonna borrow that $1 million. If I'm Elsevier, I can borrow that $1 million for 1.5 points, right? If I'm Silverchair, I can borrow that for some multiple of 1.5 points. If I'm a startup, I've got to give somebody equity. I've got to give them a huge amount of value for the future. So cost of capital is different for everybody, and typically the bigger you are, the lower the cost is. And it's a big factor in terms of trying to compete in the ecosystem that we're in. So to summarize kind of the basic ideas here, the higher the scale, the lower your costs. That's generally the case. Most of us are up against this. We have no one here from Google. We have no one here from Facebook. We don't even have anybody here from Elsevier. So we're all up against some organizations and players in our ecosystem that have scale advantages to all of us. And they have increased reach. And that's what we as specialized publishers and specialized knowledge domains with specialized audiences are up against a much larger ecosystem with these basic advantages of scale. Luckily, there are some challenges to scale as well, and we should remember those, and perhaps those can provide some of the foundations for how we can compete against these behemoths who have such sort of fundamental structural advantages. One is that you lose domain specialization as you scale. So there's very little domain specialization in a Google search. They sort of try to create it in another way, but they don't relate to you as a user as if you are a surgical oncologist with the needs that you have, or you are a petroleum engineer, exploration engineer, and the needs that you have, which have very different kinds of information needs, workflow needs, et cetera. And so as you, and in our industry you've seen it, right? So I assume everybody is, I don't need to necessarily review the way our industry has scaled, but 25 years ago, there were companies like W.B. Saunders and Churchill Livingstone and Academic Press, and somebody help me out, 30 others that are now called Elsevier. And then there were companies called Waverly and Raven and J.B. Lippincott, and they're now called Wolters Kluwer, and so on and so forth. So we've got all this giant consolidation. And one of the problems in early Science Direct was journal's a journal, right? It didn't matter, again, if you're a surgical oncologist, a geologist, a Victorian student. I guess maybe not on Science Direct, but anyway. all the same artifacts. So you get this kind of collapsing in the effort to create a repeatable artifact or a repeatable process that gives you all those benefits of scale. You lose some connection with the special needs of special audiences at various levels of increment. So that's something to remember. That's one of the advantages most of us in this room have as we address specific audiences with specific areas of knowledge pursuit, is we have an advantage against scale in that sense. And related, the loss of sort of functional innovation. If you had all the journals in the world, you wouldn't really need to worry about, you know, the surgical oncologist needing a different kind of artifact in his workflow or the petroleum engineer needing a different kind of view for her exploration. You wouldn't worry about that. You just say, this is what I got, and you're going to buy it, and you have to buy it, and that's the end of the day. So these are the areas that, in our view, we have opportunities to survive and thrive despite our general lack of scale as organizations in the sort of business world and information world. I'm going to circle back around to this, but again, the platform approach has this basic idea in mind that we can achieve some kind of scale, shared scale, in order to share some of the costs for sort of non-differentiated components, things that don't help you compete either against one another or anybody else, but just represent essentially cost of goods or cost of production. And the more volume of participants you have in an ecosystem like that, the lower the cost per participant over time. And so I think probably most of you understand this, but the way Silverchair works is the more licensing, we assign a proportion of licensing revenue to product development. So the product team gets a budget that's directly denominated by the licensing total. So as that grows, more dollars go in, and so that's kind of the mechanics of the platform approach. And just one last thing, this is probably none of this is new to anybody in the room, completely new, but if you want some good summaries, Scholarly Kitchen has done some good summaries that are very germane to our domain specifically. There's a number of good articles. If you just go there and search for scale, you get this list of these and others. These are some of the best ones. One just came out a week ago, I swear. I think Jake called up Kent and paid him off to write that article a couple days ago about the open source scale issue. But there's a handful of great pieces, and if you just wanted to do like a quick read of 4 or 5 things that'll get you very oriented to some of these problems from several very knowledgeable perspectives, I highly recommend these 4 and others. Again, just go to SK and do a search on scale. So how do we approach scale? What do we as an organization think about on your behalf? So the first is, again, what we're attempting to do in product is different than what we're trying to do in service. So Jake showed a little graph, and it showed maybe 2/3 of the company are product and technology developers, and about 1/3 of the company is, roughly speaking, is the delivery organization. So that's product and services. And I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this because I've talked about this in previous years, but it's a really important distinction, and organizations that do those things do things differently. And the services organization is responding to customer needs. You're managing it looking at utilization, optimization of your resources and how they're distributed across the demand. You look at margins in a very different way, sort of an incremental margin. It's a non-scaling function, largely, right? The product side is the side that's shared by everybody, that is a highly scaling function. It's more speculative because it's not a direct response where Colin says, Thane, please do X, and I say, Colin, that'll be $5,000, and he says, that's fine, it'll be $5,000, and you do the thing for Colin, and we're all happy. It's more, what do we collectively want? What is the outside world telling us? What are our opportunities? Okay, we go invest in that. We invest the dollars that are these percentages of licensing, and then we roll that out and hope that that supports your business going forward and moves you in the direction you need to go. And there are a lot of inputs to that and so forth. So those two organizations operate quite differently, and we, as we move forward, we're making them even more and more discrete inside of our organization over time. And in 2018, we'll actually have, for the first time, we'll have a totally discrete P&Ls for those, so that's going to help us be even better managers of those. But what are we talking about when we say the non-differentiating components? So what's in the base of what licensing is supporting, or the common product that you're all sharing? And well, it's, the environments. So the delivery, we're in a hybrid cloud now. We're gradually, as most people are, moving to a full, so when I say hybrid cloud, we have a private cloud at Raging Wire that we manage, and we use both AWS and Azure, and we're gradually moving from, initially you're putting heavy media assets out there and other kind of content assets. We're moving all the applications out. So over a couple of year period would be mostly in the public cloud, but that's not infrastructure just giving anybody any particular competitive advantage or differentiation. So for each of you to go set up a hybrid cloud or a full public cloud and get all those skills, get the personnel that know how to do that, would be a multiple of what it costs Silverchair to do it once collectively for everybody here. Excuse me. Content reuse. We're driving towards standards. You might have thought we had a standard a long time ago. Well, we initially, 15 years ago, we thought XML is a standard. Great. That's the standard. Well, then we learned XML wasn't quite specific enough, so now we have JATs. And we're moving towards bits. And we've got Todd Carpenter here who's working on a number of interesting things in this area. But in general, again, these don't provide any specific competitive advantage to you over the person next to you. Now, they provide a lot of competitive advantage to the person who's not in structured data. So XML is a big advantage over PDF. But to the extent that everybody's using XML, and increasingly everybody in the journal world is using JATS XML, and everybody in the book world is using bits XML, and even in semantic markup, our semantics, for example, are coordinated to the greatest extent possible with public taxonomies like the NLM's UMLS, sorry. I'm doing this, I'm not even looking at those notes. And UMLS is not written on there, okay? So I think I get a brain fart, just one. Keep me to it. So we're trying to coordinate the standards, but the point is we're getting to standards that everybody's sharing. We're not trying to come up with, early days of taxonomy, everybody thought, oh, I'm going to be really smart. I'm going to have my own taxonomy. That's going to be really cool. My organization can have the only taxonomy in, cardiology in the world, and I'm going to have a real advantage. Well, that's not correct. The correct thing is that we all share one. You get interchangeability, interworkability, et cetera. So these, again, are, and the ability to reuse this content, this isn't just about presenting content on the web. It's not just about discovery of content on the web. It's actually about slice, dice, reuse, reformulate, create new products that are specific use case products that apply to specific knowledge domains or functional activities within those knowledge domains. So the content architecture that allows you to do that is not any differentiating between those in the room. Again, big advantage over not having structured data, but not among people that are using structured data. The third big kind of category is this industry ecosystem. So the big G comes out and says, well, this year's new rules about Google Scholar indexing are X, right? Everybody's on their own platform. Everybody has to go do that. You have 10x the cost. We do it in one fell swoop. We have a shared cost. Again, advantage to people that want to be as discoverable as possible in Google, but no advantage among the people within that ecosystem. And everybody has to follow Google's rules, generally speaking, whether we like it or not. And there's a lot going on there. There are continued innovations, depredations, subventions. We can talk about Google as the biggest frenemy in the world. But there's a lot going on. There's a lot of investment in continually keeping up with what approaches they want to use to maximize discovery. And likewise, all the different pieces of the ecosystem. I've just mentioned a few of them, but this is just a small subset, just to give examples of the things that, again, they're necessary. You have to do them to be a participant in your ecosystem. They don't have any competitive advantage. You either do them or you don't. It's binary. And if you're doing them differently from anybody else actually doesn't make sense, and that's not what you do. So there's, again, sort of a shared componentry there. And then non-functional requirements. There's a huge array of these. This is becoming more and more important and more costly with the rise of piracy. I'm sure I don't need to tell you about that problem. User data, new requirements from various governmental entities, Europe, US, et cetera, that are evolving around this. There's lots and lots of expense there in monitoring and adapting and staying within the regulatory framework. Production performance. Like, you don't just set up a website to deliver content and then tune it and go, this is great, the website's working fast, and the average page return is blank, and so we're good. It's a constantly evolving ecosystem. You guys all want to put more assets on those pages. You all want more function on those pages. It's a constantly evolving battle to optimize systems for performance, and a constantly evolving consumer expectation around that performance, and so that's another big one. Archiving, preservation, DR, again, I won't go into all these, but just to say, none of these have any distinctive competitive value of one person over another in this room or in our ecosystem. So sharing these non-differentiated components is what that product organization at Silverchair is all about, and trying to spread those costs among the greatest number of people possible. And I just want to touch for a minute on the explosion of our ecosystem in a sort of product development and feature development world. And there's going to be, you guys probably at least got a glimpse at from your packets, Silverchair Universe, which we'll talk about in more detail this afternoon. But think of all the things that have come along since we first started putting content objects on the web and delivering them on the web. Like, it was like this little experiment. We'll, make a PDF and we'll put it at a website, and you'll go there, and then, oh, you should log in. That way we can protect the value. And then, oh, you should have it indexable. The things that keep coming and just keep coming all the time and being additive. They're not replacing, they're additive. They're new stuff that we have to do. Usage measurement gets more and more. Usage measurement pre-web was called impact factor. Now no, even better. Usage measurement pre-web was, I went to the UVA library when I was first getting in the journals business. And I was just looking around and got some journals off the shelf, and then I sat down at a little table. Yeah, they still had print journals actually available to clients. They don't any longer. They're all off in a shed somewhere underground. And there's a sign that said, don't reshelve the journals. And I was sort of put out. I was like, I know how to reshelve. I know where I got the journal from. I could put it back. And I asked a librarian about it. I said, oh, no, that's how we tell what people are using. At the end of the day, we roll around with a little cart. You pick up the ones that are left on the tables, and that's our usage measurement. For the days, right? So usage measurement is just exploding. Whether we're talking about impact in places like altmetric, or whether we're talking about counter and all those kinds of things. Content registration, first we have Crossref, then we have FundRef, then we have ORCID user ID, et cetera, marketing automation, annotation. Then we've got TDM, and we've got different kinds of data distribution. We have 87 different destinations for downstream deposits from the Silverchair platform as of today. Compliance, all this regulatory framework that comes around, not just around security, but around open access or public access. We've got community development. What are we doing? What's the future of societies? And then we got multimedia delivery, and we've got increasing demand. Video usage is so much higher generically than text usage. So how are we going to start delivering that, especially from a scholarly perspective? And then CME, CEU, continuing professional development, courses, integrating with learning management systems at universities, societies, and other places, industry. And then how are we optimizing our licensing around the world? How are we making sure that we are penetrating the global market for information, and not just in libraries, which are flat, but in industry? And then how are we doing network discovery beyond just the Google public search engine? What are the other ways that we're creating discovery? So anyway, it's overwhelming. And they just keep coming. I mean, I wrote that list of 12 things in 4 seconds. I mean, and I didn't do any research. I mean, that's just like a tip of the iceberg. And it just keeps growing. And this is all new. It's all new part of the cost structure. So we struggle too. Everybody in this room who's at a publisher has called up somebody at Silverchair and said, I just saw blank the other day. It's really cool. I'd like to integrate it into my site. And we're like, yeah, that's cool. Integrate your site. That's great. Now multiply that times everybody in this room, and realize that we can't necessarily just drop everything and integrate those 87 things. So we've got an approach. We're going to tell you about it this afternoon. But again, it's a notion of how do we scale together on this platform in ways that give flexibility but still create kind of a operational scale around embracing this. Because what we see is just the expansion of these offerings, features, services, communities is just going to continue to widen and broaden, and just you could see a sort of a cost problem coming down on the whole industry where it can't go forever. So we've got a novel approach that we think is going to be sort of helpful, useful. We hope it will be. So earlier I talked about product development scale, and sort of product development, it seems a little bit oxymoronic to say, well, you can do product development at scale, because you're sort of like, this is a one-off activity, we're going to do a prototype, we're going to do a, it's going to be expense, some of the expense is never going to be paid back. We're certainly not replicating or productionizing. But I think you still look at product development scale as having, first of all, there is product development scale. It's in the process, and the characteristics are a little bit different from sort of production operating scale, the factors I was talking about earlier. But they're really, they're real. So you've got to have a process that can accommodate these non-scalable things, new ideas, new experiments, things you want to try. You have to create the scale by having the tools in the process to do those things. So how can we make experimentation cheaper, faster, easier? How can we make the process of ideation and testing those? So it's created by tools and process. And product development is first about figure out what the right thing is and then build that thing right. So figuring out the right thing is the product ideation. Building that thing right is productionizing, efficiency, making it efficient, making it scale. So we are fully adopted to Agile. I know most of you all know that. You're probably familiar with the terms of sprint, the cycles of sprint. There's some things about Agile that help product development if you can embrace it. Now, what Agile tries to do, its fundamental premise is kind of fast cycling of results so that you can react to those results and adjust course. So you have a sprint every 3 weeks. You see working software. You adjust priority. You see how long something took in 3 weeks. You adjust priorities. You adjust direction. You adjust output. And it's related to lean. So lean product development has this basic idea that we want to learn as quickly as we can and react to that learning as quickly as we can. And we do those things as cheaply as we can so that we can stay on course and make the right product. So everybody talks about an MVP now. That came out of lean, a minimum viable product. What we put out there to get some feedback to it. It's not going to be the end product. It's not going to be the right product. It's not going to be the perfect product. It might not be a money-making product. But what it will do is it's enough to put out there and get feedback and get responses so that we can adjust course and not try to do this. This is typically sort of contrasted with, sort of the waterfall universe, right? So the waterfall universe is this idea that we're going to build a battleship, and we'll take 6 years to design the battleship and specify it, and then we'll take 2 years to run a bidding process. Now we're at 8 years, and then we'll spend 4 years to build it, and 12 years later we have a battleship. And it's exactly what was specified. The problem is that the battleship technology has changed pretty significantly in 12 years. And so in the web scale, that's why this has been adopted, because web technology changes even faster than industrial technology does. And so you have to, you just can't afford the risks and the delays. You'll almost certainly be wrong if you sit down and specify and spend 3 years specifying a product that you're then going to build for 3 years, and 6 years later that's going to be your product. You just can't afford to do that. So you have to have a different way of working. So there's some challenges working across organizational boundaries with Agile, because typically when you have an arm's length agreement between a vendor or a supplier or what a partner and a buyer, the buyer wants to know what they're getting, and they want to know how much they're going to spend. They don't know how long it's going to take. Fair enough. That's the way we work, right? That's not actually very Agile. That's very waterfall. Oh, you want to know how long it's going to take? Well, you need to specify it. You know how much it's going to cost? We need to specify. Well, wait a minute. I thought you said we shouldn't specify. We should work as we go. So there's some conflict in the notion of Agile, and it creates conflict for traditional commercial relationships. And those have to be worked through. We don't have all the answers. What I would say is, we've had a lot of success trying to work through this in our partnerships, and we're developing models that help kind of smooth out some of those challenges in the relational part of things. So part of this is about retained development models. So some of you here work in either a retained team model or at least a retained development agreement. The notion is that depending on your scale and your product development investment over a given year, You're investing ratably on an even, so instead of saying, I've got a project, please give me an SOW, and then we'll do this project, and then it'll cost that much, and then that'll be done, and then 4 months later, now I have this other project, and going through all that administrative overhead and going through all the lumpiness, you say, our budget for project development this year is X, we divide that over 12 months, and we work together in an agile fashion. You know what you're going to spend, you eliminate an enormous amount of administrative overhead. You typically have the same people working on those projects, so that instead of being from a pool of, okay, here's a development team this time, then I come back 4 months later and it's a different development team. So there's some gains to that. So these things are working well for us. The obvious problem you have is when this goes to the legal department, they're like, wait a minute, what am I getting? What am I getting for that? What are the deliverables? What's this, what, you know, and you're together describing to legal or administration, well, we're generally getting these things. We're generally in this direction. The specifics are going to be worked out in the process. So it's challenging, and it doesn't necessarily work for everybody, but I would suggest if you connect the dots, the agile process is necessary. The waterfall process is putting the brakes on everybody's speed and their effectiveness and their yield of outputs from their development investment. So finding a way that can work in your organization to become more agile, which is to say to be able to adjust priorities, to get quick learnings and change course on a very quick increment, and also to know that you're going to have development resources available. And the other problem, and whether it's with Silverchair or anybody else, in an open model, you never know when somebody's going to say, I'm doing nothing, first quarter nothing, second quarter nothing, third quarter, fourth quarter, oh, I got to do something. Okay, I have a $900,000 project. I need you to do it in the fourth quarter. Well, that might work, you know, but you know, Silverchair and no other development organization sit around with like, it's not the NFL with 76 guys on the bench that don't play, and like, oh, okay, it's time to go in. You know, I mean, that's not the way it works. And these services are optimization models. So this gives you an understanding in that window of what resources are going to be available. They're committed. You know, kind of the productivity of that of that commitment, those resources. You know, they're going to be available. So we're working towards that. I think we've done really well. We have 3 or 4 publishers who have an actual retained team, which is a full agile team committed to them. And I think we've gotten far more productivity. And I know we'll see later today, sort of publisher satisfaction, we've gotten greater satisfaction out of those. Then we have the retained model, which is it's not a full team, but it's a certain proportion to spend. And I think everybody thinking about moving in that direction is a way to think about product development a little more efficiently. So that's what I just said, teams and fractions. And we do get more velocity, and you get more visibility. So when legal is saying, well, we don't know what we're going to get, well, you're going to know every 3 weeks what you're getting, and there are different metrics from the classic metrics, but it's certainly worth looking at. I know it's not easy for everybody. Everybody has different kinds of governance, different kinds of management, but I think you'll find that that's pretty bad. And then finally, I think the other sort of there's not going to be a ton of roadmap detail today. You guys have probably, most of you have seen our roadmap process. Over the last 3 years, we've gotten much more formal about the roadmap process, which is how do we take in the requirements that each of you bring to the table, other requirements that come to us, you know, sort of from market awareness, situational awareness, environmental awareness, and put them into a process. And that contributes to product development, because you're not going to have to do everything under your own steam. What we're really looking to do is to figure out together what are the things we all need that are those non-differentiating components. And there are going to be more of them in the future that we all need. And then which are the things that are really domain-specific, audience-specific, organizational-specific that are not going to be done at the platform level, but you still have the flexibility to do in this process. And that's our sort of objective. So what we're trying to accomplish with all of this, and then I'll sort of wrap. One is to allow independent publishers to remain independent. And I include everybody independent. I mean, some of you might think that some players here are not independent, but when I think of the larger scale of our industry, we are a pretty independent group, and the ability to stay independent and to, more importantly, have a sustainable business model and a sustainable product development and product delivery process and identity is important to us. We want to enable the vertical. We believe in the vertical. We believe the vertical is the one antidote to just the pure ultra economic scale. So what is it about your audiences in your specific field, or fields, in your specific content assets and knowledge assets, and your unique ideas that can create new value on top of the sort of substrate of the traditional sort of scholarly literature, right? So we've got this literature foundation. We've got the primary literature. We've got a big reference literature, and there's so many things to do on top of that. How do we enable that for you? Because we think that's the future. The cost of hosting an article on the web is going to do nothing but go down and down and down, and the cost that you can recover for the usage of that article is going to go down and down and down. It's going to go down because it gets aggregated up and up and up into a big deal, the database publishing deal. It's going to go down and down and down because the government's going to demand that you give it away after 12 or 6 or 1 month, who knows. It's going to go down and down and down because Sci-Hub is going to steal it all and give it away under the guise of some kind of Robin Hood BS. So what are you going to do about that? Probably not going to stop those things. Probably going to have to come up with some new ideas on top of that and build from what you have, and that's the environment that we're trying to enable. So it's fundamentally about trying to maintain this correct balance, the title of our meeting, the balance between, or the right balance between scale and innovation is a challenge. It's difficult, it's not obvious, but that's what we're fundamentally trying to do. We need your help doing that. We need your help figuring out the directions we need to go. And hopefully today you'll hear a lot more specifics about some of these themes and how we're trying to address them and how some of our publishers are addressing them. So with that, how was my timing? Too long? Too short?
We do have a little time for questions.
So it was too short?
No, you're good. That was great. But you left an appropriate amount of time for questions. So if there are questions in the crowd, and I saw a lot of people writing notes down, so if there's anything that came up that you'd like to ask Thane further about his thinking or Silverchair's approach to these themes.
Okay, there's one. I thought I gave a perfect presentation. See, if there's no questions, I always consider the answer, then I just covered everything perfectly. Go ahead, Allison.
So experiencing for the first time working with a partner that operates on an agile process, I'm becoming familiar with the challenges of doing agile across organizational.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit more about what is the root cause of those challenges in the project? So beyond the contract phase, which was fun,
Yeah.
and into the actual working phase.
Right.
How do you see trying to smooth out those challenges more?
Yeah. So, well, there's a couple different things. So let's start at the beginning, which is the contracting part. So a lot of organizations, in my business career included, whenever I am buying services from other organizations, we have a traditional idea, and it's not unreasonable at all to say, how much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? And what am I going to get? Right? In fact, failing to ask those questions is kind of problematic, right? So in a crude way, if you were to say, well, what Agile is saying is, I don't know when it's going to come, and I don't know how much you're going to spend, and I'm not sure what you're going to get. Now, that's a bad answer, right? Because that's not really what goes on. So negotiating, that is, Agile product development grew out of pure product development companies, right? So we're providing a service to you all. You have products, you have more products you want to do, you have business continuity issues. If you're migrating from somewhere else, or you're standing up a new product and you've got timelines, marketing budget, whatever, you need to know certain things are going to happen on a certain time. So there has to ultimately be a blended idea. We're going to launch a journals platform. We're going to launch this book collection. We're going to launch this clinical tool set, or whatever the case may be, and we're going to launch it on this date. But what we're going to do is we're going to work together over the period of time to define exactly what the functional requirements are. And the retained model gives you this sense of there is a budget that we're working within. Now, the next problem is, you'd say, as a buyer of that, you'd say, well, how do I know your people are productive? People might be really not productive, or my team might not be productive. That's kind of a problem. So there's issues with that. One is we've had a lot of success doing this once we've been working with somebody for several years and they understand kind of the output level and the productivity level and they've seen it. So we don't always start with somebody who's brand new to Silverchair in that. But as it grows and people vouch for it, they begin to see that we're productive. Also, we've developed really good measures, and Doug Morrison, who's been in the role of Chief Delivery Officer for about 15 months now and has done incredible things, can give us actual objective KPIs around the productivities of teams. So we can begin to predict with much more certainty, like, what the output level of that team is going to be. Now that's still, the output level of the team is still not the same as a deliverable level. In the sense of, you're thinking of a deliverable as a finished product that you're vending now to the world, but it is an output level. And what the unknowns are is, when you start out in the product development process, what's the complexity here? I mean, some things are known, but there's a lot of things when you're building new things that they're unknown. So what's the complexity of that? And that's a shared relationship there. So I would say, to answer your question, number one, making sure everybody's really clear on those fundamental tensions right from the beginning and understand kind of how it's going to work and what they're signing up for. You know, it's one thing to sign up for fixed price, deliverables, fixed date, boom, and then we're going to say, okay, give us the specs, and you're going to write the specs, and we're kind of waterfally there. But that's if you know that's what you're doing. If you're signing up for a more agile relationship, you have to be fully aware and be open to what the realities are. So that's one, the front end. The second thing is, you know, we still do struggle with smoothing resources because not everybody works fully agile all the time. So we don't have everybody who's on Silverchair in some kind of retained development arrangement. So we still have those spurts where somebody says, I've got to do this, I've got to do this in this period of next quarter, whatever. We make mistakes in estimating how much time something's going to take. So when we're committed to a migration, and we've got to make the migration. You got business continuity issues, you got an expiry somewhere else. So this is not a new thing, this is a transfer. We've got to make those. So we're not perfect in like balancing those things. And so ideally, what I'd like to see is in the future, everybody works retained, and then our resourcing can be much more smooth and predictable. But it's communication, understanding on the front end, and it's adapting, and then it's prioritization. Like, what's business continuity versus what's nice to have, and trying to work that way with people. So, and finally, the answer is it's still a work in progress, because I don't think, you know, I go to other groups. I'm in the OLC, the Outsell Leadership, and we have different CEOs from different businesses, like not in scholarly publishing necessarily, and I brought up this concept of like the difficulty of working agile across organizational lines, and everybody's like, yeah, it's really hard, it's really hard. 2 people say, you can never do it, and then 3 people say, well, you can kind of do it, and then 2 people say, yeah, you can do it. So it's still evolving, because agile really started as a internal product development concept. So Silicon Valley is kind of where it came out of, and it's like, I'm going to build a product for me that I'm going to vend. I don't have a business continuity or a partner that I'm delivering to. So it wasn't really designed for that, and so we're trying to adapt it to that. We still think it has these functional values, but it's still a challenge. So there's no perfect answer. The biggest one is communication on the front and through the process, and then smoothing the resources. Jerry.
Hi, Thane. Thank you for that great opening. Sitting here, a question popped into my mind that I debated with myself whether I should wait till the end of the day to ask it, but I'll ask it at the beginning.
How much would it cost for Silverchair to host IEEE? Okay, yeah, well, let's make him a deal. No, I'm teasing.
No, you briefly mentioned Sci-Hub, right? And when one thinks of Sci-Hub, they think mostly open access. I think of Sci-Hub as all of the content in one place, a really easy, simple search. And we're sitting here in the Alexandria Center today, and I'm wondering if you see a day where all of the publishing content, all of the STM scholarly publishing is indeed in one platform as a service to the world and the users, that it's one simple place to go to, simple search, find it. Publishers who develop that content, of course, are distributed income from that, revenue from that platform. But do you see a day, given the politics involved, but do you see Sci-Hub pushing us toward that scenario someday?
Yeah, so of course what a lot of people have said about Sci-Hub and interviewing users of Sci-Hub and so forth is, well, I'm not really a pirate, you know. I respect the value of intellectual property, but it's so much easier to get an article at Sci-Hub than to go through the damn authentication that either works or doesn't work, and I got a society membership and my SSO doesn't work, and probably some of you have been in the audience. There was a STM Frankfurt a couple years ago. Somebody gave a real-time demonstration of trying to find an article on somebody's platform. and how many times they got bounced around and how awful the experience was. So that's all legit, right? But it's also kind of a little bit of a, it's also, in my opinion, if you really want to talk about ethically, it's an ethical dodge. That said, I think the answer to your question is probably yes. I mean, the question is it going to be Google, and is that just going to do it? I mean, Google, if you think about what Google is doing, and we spend, I mentioned earlier, a lot of time interfacing with them, and I was at Google earlier this spring with Wes Royer, and there are things that we haven't seen yet that are coming, and all of those things point towards them being that, right? Only the crappy thing about that is where's your monetization out of that, right? I mean, not that they're giving away articles, but the rules that they have established. I mean, we saw what they did to the news business. There was this recent, we kicked you into the ditch, we drained all your blood, and now we've said to you a couple weeks ago, like, oh yeah, maybe we shouldn't shoot you in the head. All right, you can stay there. I'm not anti-Google necessarily, but I do understand that they have a very serious long-term aspiration to do that. So the question is, are we going to solve this through a smoother distributed approach, right? So we leave everything where it is, but we eliminate all those nasty hurdles that people are dealing with authentication, and by the way, in the mix, have a good enough authentication security regime, which isn't going to be IP authentication, right, to prevent another Sci-Hub. And I'm a big believer in distributed. You know, I'm a founding board member of Chorus. You know, our whole thing is distributed, not repository, and that's the right answer, because that provides publishers with a business model, that provides the article in situ, so you get all the other artifacts that go with it that wouldn't necessarily go into a repository, and blah, 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 blah. But there are a lot of challenges to getting there. I guess RA21 is one of those. You could have another concept, right, which is we'll do one big global database. It won't be Google. It'll be everybody's XML, and then we'll build a super rich API on top of it, and then everybody can subscribe to the API. And what we'll do is make the bottom layer of that, the database layer of that, just cheap as crap. You know, 5 cents on the dollar of what it is to host an article or a chapter or whatever today, and then we'll have APIs on top of that, and people build products out of them, and that's where they monetize. That might happen. It's a big investment, and somebody has to think about, like, what would that really be worth? You could strip a lot of cost out of it, and maybe in that process you could solve some authentication things. Right now, if I had to bet, I mean, I just think Google is so powerful, and everybody in this room sits there and goes, oh, that sucks, that's terrible. I'm not, okay, I'll do it. You know, and whether it's, I mean, the latest thing is they want to host their own version of the XML and build their own internal links. So, I mean, they're just, and people in this room are doing it, as you well know. So it's just one step after another. So the question is whether we can continue as domain specialists to extract value from the stuff we're producing is an open one. And I wish I had a more definitive answer. But I think Google is on the path. I think if we are going to do something, is RA21 going to do it in and of itself? Well, that's a long road and still very experimental, and it may not really, it's still not going to be, whatever it is, isn't going to be as easy as free at Sci-Hub, right? So I'm not sure. Maybe we should try to build one world database instead of Google. We'll see. All right, other questions? Peter?
Hi, you talked earlier about product development scale, and this may borrow a little bit from later. I was just curious if you had any sort of really sort of good or interesting examples you could point to that you've seen recently of somebody executing that really well.
Yeah, so there's a couple of specific answers. I think there will be some things about that later. One is tooling, right? So we've spent a lot of those platform resources trying to develop tools that push out product creation, and that would include experimentation, out to non-technical users at the publisher, in the publisher organization. So in other words, editors and marketers and publishers can actually interface with these tools and create whole products, you know, have access to their whole database of content, have access to templates, have access to setting up the e-commerce product version of that. And so that's a continued push for us. So we'd like to enable people to be able, at very low cost, $0 to us and $0 to a technical person in their own shop, to be able to try things out. And so you'll see forthcoming in the next 12 months lots of our publishers trying things like that. And some of the initial stuff is just around collections, slice audiences, sort of the replacement of what we used to call special sales. So industry wants to pay for this slice or that slice, and you can put that together at essentially no cost. In the old days it was, some pharma company wants to pay for a special sale book, and so we'd print 30,000 copies for them, they'd pay a certain amount. Now you could commission, using these tools, the digital version of that at essentially no cost. I mean, somebody can do it in a day. So that's one big example. I think the other example, again, is the process. When I'm saying the process is the scale, and that comes back to this agile idea. Like, and we've done plenty of it over the years. We've been around a long time. I mean, we've had people come in and say, we're going to waterfall this thing, we're going to spend $3 million building this thing, and then we'll see if it works, right? And that's just not, I mean, that's what we had to do. We didn't understand this process or whatever. What we need to do now is spend $15,000 and see if it works, right? And then save the $2.985 million for something else when it doesn't work. So that's what agile process is all about. So the scale is not so much in that we're in an ops scale, but what we are is we're saying, at those economics, I get 200 tries, right? Before I've spent $3 million on one behemoth thing. So that's kind of, and so actually, if you look around we have lots and lots of products that have been iteratively developed by our clients at Pediatrics, at McGraw-Hill, and others who have kind of worked on products on that kind of cycle and created things without so much front-end expense. So that's the other big example of that.